guys, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video I'm going to be showing you how to crochet the double crochet, also known as a treble crochet if you are using UK terms. I am using US terms today, so it will be referred to as a double crochet, but I just wanted to clarify, if you are following UK terms, this is known as a treble crochet. So to get started, you are going to need some yarn, of course, and a crochet hook. Now you can use any size yarn and hook that you like. I am today using a Templar yarn, otherwise known as a worsted weight or an Aran weight yarn, with a 5mm crochet hook. But again, you can use whichever yarn and hook you like, as long as the hook matches the yarn size, obviously. So to get started, you want to go ahead and find the end of your yarn, and you're then going to chain up as many chains as you like. So of course, starting with a slip knot first of all and popping that onto our hook. Now the amount of chains that you complete will just depend on what exactly you are making, of course, but for today's demonstration purposes, I am going to chain up a total of 13 stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So there we have 13 chain stitches. Now the reason I've chained 13 stitches is because the last 3 chains are our turning chains. So they will still count as a stitch in the next row, as I will show you guys. But just keep in mind, when we're starting row 1, we're going to be skipping the first 3 chains. Okay, so what we're going to do to complete our first double crochet is to yarn over, skipping those first 3 chains, finding that 4th chain, inserting our hook, yarning over again, pulling through that first loop only, yarning over again, pulling through the first 2 loops only, yarning over again, and pulling through those final 2 loops. And that is your very first double crochet. Now you'll see here what I mean about the chain 3 counting as our stitch. So when we've completed row 1 and then we come back to the end of row 2, we will be crocheting into the top of that chain 3 because that will technically be a stitch. So even though we've chained 13 stitches, we will only have 11 because we've skipped some at the beginning. So moving on to the next double crochet, we will just be finding that next chain stitch just there, yarning over, inserting our hook into that next chain stitch, yarning over again, pulling through that first loop only, yarning over again, pulling through the first 2 loops only, yarning over again, and pulling through those final 2 loops. And you've now just completed another double crochet. I'll show you guys again. So yarning over, finding that next chain stitch, inserting your hook, yarning over again, pulling through that first loop only, yarning over, pulling through those first 2 loops, yarning over again, and pulling through the final 2 loops. And there we have another double crochet. I'm going to go ahead now and finish off this row, and I'll meet you right back here at the end and I'll show you how we move on to row 2. Okay, so here I am at the end of row 1. I am about to complete my very last double crochet of the row. So again, yarning over, inserting my hook into that last chain stitch, yarning over again, pulling through the first loop only, yarning over again, pulling through the first 2 loops, yarning over again, and pulling through those final 2 loops. So now we have completed our first row of double crochet. You should have something that looks a little bit like this. And now we're ready to move on to row 2. So just like we did at the very beginning, we now need to create our turning chain. So we are going to go ahead and chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and again when we get back to this stitch in the next row, this will count as a double crochet, so we will be crocheting into that turning chain. But now all we're going to do is turn our work, so just flip it over just like that, and we're now going to be working back in this direction. So because our turning chain does count as our first double crochet, you want to skip that very first stitch. So that very first stitch there, we do not need to crochet into it because this turning chain counts as our first stitch. So we're going to find that second stitch, and that will be the first one we crochet into for row 2. So yarning over, finding that second stitch, inserting your hook. So you should have a little V on top, yarning over again, pulling through that first loop only, yarning over again, pulling through the first 2 loops only, yarning over again, and pulling through the final 2 loops. Hopefully you guys are starting to pick it up by now, but I will just show you a couple more times just to make it super duper clear. So now we will just be going into the next stitch, so no need to skip. We're going straight into that very next stitch, so yarning over, finding that next stitch, inserting our hook, yarning over again, pulling through that first loop, yarning over again, pulling through the first 2 loops, yarning over again, and pulling through the final 2 loops. And that is another double crochet. Again, yarning over, finding that very next stitch, inserting our hook, yarning over, pulling through that first loop only, yarning over again, pulling through the first 2 loops only, yarning over again, and pulling through the final 2 loops. Just like that. Now I'm going to go ahead and finish off this row. I will meet you back here at the end and I'll show you how we crochet into the top of our chain 3. Okay, so here we are at the end of row 2, and you'll see that the last stitch we need to crochet into is the top of that chain 3 we completed at the very beginning. So if you look really closely, you will see the top of the chain 3 there. Now that is what we want to go through. So just like we have been doing, we want to yarn over, find the top of that chain 3, and insert our hook through the top of that chain 3. Now it will look a little bit different on your hook because again, it's not actually a proper stitch, it's just a chain stitch. So you won't get that little V on top, it will just be a single strand. So just keep that in mind. It is correct, but it just will look a little bit different to all the other stitches. Now we want to yarn over again and complete our stitch as normal. So pulling through that first loop only, yarning over again, pulling through the first 2 loops only, yarning over again, and pulling through those final 2 loops. And that completes your row. Now I just want to point out as well that it is really important that you do crochet into the top of your chain 3 before you finish your row. If you don't, it'll mean you've skipped a stitch and then your stitch count will be off and all your edges will be all wonky and your work will start to go into a triangle because you're technically skipping stitches at the end of each row. So each row will get shorter and shorter. So just keep in mind that you do need to crochet into the top of your chain 3 at the end of each row. Otherwise you will drop stitches and your work will not look nice and neat and you won't have straight edges. Okay, so I am now going to go ahead and complete a couple more rows and I will come back to you and show you what it looks like when you've worked up a few rows of the double crochet. Okay, so here we have it. This is what the double crochet looks like in a swatch. So as you can see, I've done quite a few little rows so you can get an idea of what the stitch looks like. Now I love the double crochet because it does actually work up really quickly once you get the hang of it, because it is quite a long stitch. So it does work up super duper quickly, but the only downfall to this stitch is it can create quite wholly work, which you can see here because the stitches are so long, so there will be gaps in between your stitches. So just keep that in mind if you aren't wanting a wholly look for your work. But the double crochet is a pretty common stitch. You'll find it in most crochet patterns. And again, it does work up really, really quickly. So it's a great stitch to learn and basically a necessity if you want to crochet anything or follow any crochet patterns in the future. And then once you finish your work, obviously you would go ahead and cut your yarn and fasten this off. I'm not going to do that because I'm going to unravel this and save the yarn for something else. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, as always, please don't forget to give me a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel and turn on your notifications so you will be notified of all my future videos. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching and I will see you next time. Bye, guys.